This meeting of the Norwood City Council is hereby called to order. Please rise for the prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance. Our Father, who art in heaven, as a body we congregate in these council chambers. We pray for thy divine guidance, that we may do all things well, according to thy holy will. Amen. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I request that you remain standing. It hardly seems appropriate to have a moment of silence for Margaret Waymeyer, because Margaret was anything but silent. She kept us on our toes. She was an involved citizen. She's a citizen that every city wishes that they had. And I'd like to just pause for a moment and remember Margaret, and we will miss her. So if we could just have a moment of silence. Thank you. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Here.
Mr. Clark.
Here.
Mrs. Stickley.
Here.
Mr. Blair.
Here.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Here.
Mr. Sanker.
Here.
Mr. Mumper.
Here.
All members are present, and welcome to those new members.
Thank you.
We have several requests to amend the agenda. The first is to add the auditor's report under the administration reports. Next is to remove the letter from communications number 10, the letter from the law director, the annual report, to remove that from the agenda. We have a request to add a letter from OKI regarding the Ohio in Kentucky, Indiana Regional Council of Governments. That would become the new number 10. We have a request to, as number 11, to add the report from the tax department as number 11, and then as communication number 12, a report from the law director 2015 from the previous law director, Chris Brown. Mr. Mumper,
I move we amend the agenda as you just stated so
would
eloquently.
you like to repeat this?
I've got it written down.
Okay. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Clark. Is there any discussion? And I'm not really like trying to get out of your view. This chair keeps lowering, so occasionally I will be moving back up. The motion on the floor is to amend the agenda. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mrs. Stickley.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
All members present voting aye. We'll move on to the minutes of the previous meetings. We have December the 8th, December 22nd, December 28th of 2015, and January 1st of 2016. Would you prefer to do them collectively?
I would just like to note that Sarah Allen's name was spelled wrong in the minutes from at least the 8th and the 22nd.
Oh, we can correct those. Thank you. On the 28th. Which pleasure? Individually or collectively? Mr. Clark,
Move that we approve all 4 sets of minutes collectively as if read, please.
is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Blair. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mrs. Stickley.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. We do have requests to address council, but not on agenda items, so we will do those at the end of the agenda. We have no reports of standing committees or third and second readings of ordinances, so we'll move on to introductory readings of ordinances. The first is an ordinance authorizing the Director of Service Safety of the City of Norwood to enter into a contract with TA Tech Plus to provide services to the City of Norwood, office services to the Clerk of Council, office services to the Civil Services Commission, and Tier 1 IT technical services for the City of Norwood, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Sanker.
Madam President, I recommend that we have all 3 readings by caption only.
Seconded by Mr. Mumper. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mrs. Stickley.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanrahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Please have all three readings.
Ordinance authorizing the Director of Service Safety of the City of Norwood to enter into a contract with TA Tech Plus to provide services to the City of Norwood. Office services to the Clerk of Council, office services to the Civil Services Commission, and Tier 1 IT technical services for the City of Norwood and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Director of Service Safety of the City of Norwood to enter into a contract with TA Tech Plus to provide services to the City of Norwood. Office services to the Clerk of Council, office services to the Civil Service Commission, and Tier 1 IT technical services for the City of Norwood and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Director of Service Safety of the City of Norwood to enter into a contract with TA Tech Plus to provide services to the City of Norwood. Office services to the Clerk of Council, office services to the Civil Services Commission, and Tier 1 IT technical services for the City of Norwood and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Mumper.
Move the ordinance be passed.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Bonzo. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mrs. Stickley.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanrahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. We'll move on to ordinance number 2, an ordinance creating section 759.06, improper solicitation. Mr. Clark,
Move to have the first reading of this ordinance.
is there a second? Seconded by Mrs. Hanrahan. Is there any discussion? Mr. Sanker.
Yes, Madam President, if I could go through the chair to the law director and ask for a brief explanation on how this ordinance came about and how it feels it's going to hold up as far as compared to other legislation similar to this in other communities.
Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Madam President. Back in December, Tim Gary, who's sitting back there, who was recently appointed the Assistant Law Director, went on a ride-along with one of the police officers, and afterward he was asking officers, what are some things that we can do when we get into office? And one of their requests was an ordinance to deal with panhandlers. And there are some communities that have tried, that have had trouble. We went to the Cincinnati ordinance, which has had a good 20 years of litigation back and forth. That they passed something and the courts overturned it, they passed it again, they overturned it. And started with that as a model and kind of tweaked it to fit Norwood specific situations. The idea is that it outlaws things like if somebody is lying to you about, oh, I was a veteran, can you help me? Or my kids are stuck in the car on the interstate, we're out of gas, can I get $5? If they're lying about that, it makes it a crime. If they're harassing people, it makes it a crime, that kind of thing. Because we just didn't have anything. And it's something the police think will give them some extra tools to be able to make the city a better place.
Is there any other discussion? Mr. Blair?
Yeah, I just have a question. So, would this listing ordinance, would that also be mutually exclusive with loitering at all? Like, per se, as I read in the ordinance, if there were people on a corner and individuals were walking down the street and they were either threatened or felt any harm, could this help them as well, or would that have to be a whole nother thing?
Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Madam President. This only covers situations where somebody's asking for money in particular. Hey, we need some money. Can I get some money from you? So it wouldn't do that. If people are being harassed, if they are being threatened, there are different parts of the code that could help with that. If you have anything specific kind of instance, talk to me after the meeting or give me a call and we'll see what we can find.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Is there any other discussion? The motion on the floor is to have the first reading. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mrs. Stickley.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanrahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Please have the first reading.
Ordinance creating section 759.06, improper solicitation.
We'll move on to the final introductory readings of ordinances. An ordinance amending section 137.01, Assistant Law Director, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Sanker.
Madam President, I recommend we have the first reading on this as well.
Seconded by Mr. Mumper. Is there any discussion?
I do
Mr.
have
Blair?
one question, if that's all right, for Mr. Moore. I did read in here that Mr. Gary would also like to work outside as well. Would that just be on his vacation time where he would be able to work with other individuals? Or is that also during his time here as assistant law director at the same time? Because I'm just fearful for conflicts of interest if that were to ever pop up. And I'm sorry that I did word that very wrong. But
Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Madam President. I honestly, this is something that came to my attention very, very recently. I had no idea. As far as I know, and my understanding is, this is the only position which precludes you from working other than for the city. It's the only ordinance that's in there. It had something, it was, back in the 80s or 90s, there was, it was a particular situation. It was one of those situations where it was passed to deal with a particular person that was coming in. The way it's written, though, the assistant law director can't perform any pro bono work, can't do any legal work at all. And again, it's the only position where a situation like that exists. Anybody else who works for the city can get a part-time job or can work weekends, evenings, vacation time, doing other kinds of, doing work, working for other people. And lots of city employees work outside. They do other things to make money outside the city, including, the fireman that practices law. But yeah, it would not be on city time running a law practice out of the law director's office.
okay.
As attorneys, we have a very, very clear understanding and a high sensitivity to conflicts of interest, but that's what it is. And I would just request that if it is within council's discretion, if they would so desire, it would be my request that we have all three readings on this tonight to go ahead and pass it. And I will say this, if it turns out to be a problem, council can always come back and add some different changes if they'd like.
Mr. Clark?
Question to Mr. Moore. Do you foresee a time, though, where there could be a conflict of interest representing the city? I can think of maybe a housing issue where he would go and represent us as a city, and maybe that's his client, and a different issue on the side. And, I could see an issue maybe of there being a conflict of interest in a situation like that.
Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Madam President. It certainly could. The bigger issue, I'll tell you actually, the bigger issue is when it comes to public attorneys that are not lifelong in a position is former clients. Because if you've ever represented somebody and they come in front of, they're charged with something for the city on the other side, that becomes a serious conflict of interest. And in fact, it's something that happens as we have law directors appointed to the bench or assistant law directors appointed to be prosecutors. There's lots of things they end up having to recuse themselves from because they worked on it in a different role. So in theory, yes, but again, it's one of those things that is, that's a part of becoming, it's part of the training, it's part of what you do as an attorney is every time you deal with a potential client is you look at potential conflicts of interest. So I can't imagine at all. I'm not going to be no one that has ever represented the city of Norwood while they're the law director, while they're assistant law director, would ever think of like, oh, I think I'll represent one of the landowners that may have a citation against them kind of thing. Or you end up on the other side of that. I don't foresee that being an issue, actually, in a practical way, in the way you're worried, we should get rid of it, we should keep this restriction because we're worried about that. That I don't see that as being an issue in any way.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Is there any other discussion? Mr. Sanker?
Madam President, question through the chair to the law director. Keith, as far as you mentioned, recommended having all three readings this evening. Is just reason for that? I don't know if he has something going on already that he's kind of in the middle of.
Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Madam President. He does have a couple of clients with probate matters that are almost completed that he would like to finish up instead of passing them off to another lawyer to the last thing because he's got a relationship with them. They're relatively minor. It's not a thing that would be, he's not going to end up in a 6-week trial anytime soon.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Bonzo?
Yeah, I'd just like to say it does kind of make sense to do this because if there were an accountant in the auditor's office that maybe they wanted to do taxes on the weekends during tax season, it just seems like that they would be allowed to do that, but Mr. Gary wouldn't be allowed to, or any assistant law director wouldn't be allowed to help a family member out with a legal issue, if you will. So yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion? Mr. Clark?
Sorry, just one more question. If there would be, to Mr. Moore, if there would be a conflict of interest, how would that be handled? Would we bring someone else in, or would you take over? How would that be handled if there was a conflict of interest?
Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Madam President. I would handle it, or, in theory, depending on what the matter was, outside counsel.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Any other discussion? Mr. Sanker?
Madam President, if it is something that, I don't know, if it is something that really needs to be taken care of, then even though I think we should really have the first, I would go with the second and third readings as well and put that behind us.
Are you withdrawing your motion to have the first reading?
Yes, Madam President.
And Mr. Mumper, would you withdraw your second?
Yes.
So we have no motions on the floor now. Mr. Mumper?
I move we suspend the rules and have all three readings of the ordinance.
Seconded by Mrs. Hanrahan. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mrs. Stickley?
Yes.
Mr. Blair?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanrahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes.
Mr. Mumper?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Please have all three readings.
Ordinance amending Section 137.01, Assistant Law Director, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance amending Section 137.01, Assistant Law Director, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance amending Section 137.01, Assistant Law Director, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Mumper?
I move the ordinance be passed.
Is there a second? Second by Mrs. Stickley. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mrs. Stickley?
Yes.
Mr. Blair?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanrahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes.
Mr. Mumper?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. We'll move on to introductory readings of resolutions. The first is a resolution requesting the county auditor to make advance payment of taxes pursuant to Ohio Revised Code Section 321.34 and declaring an emergency. Mr. Clark?
I'd move that we suspend the rules and have all three readings of this resolution.
Seconded by Mr. Mumper. Is there any discussion? Mr. Sanker?
Madam President, a question through the chair to the auditor.
Yes, sir. Your question
Mr.
is?
Stitt, would you just like to give a brief explanation of this ordinance and how it benefits the city?
Mr. Stith?
Yes, Madam President. The county collects taxes on behalf of all of the municipalities within Hamilton County. They typically hold on to all their taxes until they're collected and then make two payments during the year, one in May and one in September. That's actually the city's money that they're holding. They're collecting tax money now. I got my tax bill for my property tax 2 days ago in the mail. So when I pay it next week, that is money that should come to the city, but instead sits in the county's bank account until they're ready to pay us in May. We are allowed to ask for that money as it comes in order to help cover expenses. We've done this for about the past 3 or 4 years to help cover the first quarter expenses, mostly payroll expenses each year. This year, we need that tax money for the $1.2 million bond that is due at the end of March. So if we want to be able to pay that, we need to ask the county for the money that is collected on our behalf as it comes in.
Is there any other discussion? Yes, Mrs. Stickley?
Is the money that we're asking for both for the May and the September disbursement, or just the May?
Mr. Stith?
Yes, Madam President. This will be, the resolution allows the auditor and treasurer to write a joint letter requesting advances, and usually we send it in March requesting everything for the May, and then if we want additional advances, then both Mr. Maloney and I have to sign a letter requesting that on a month-by-month basis for the second half payment.
Thank you, Mr. Stitt. Is there any other discussion? The motion on the floor is to suspend the rules. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mrs. Stickley.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Yes.
Mr. Senker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Please have all three readings.
A resolution requesting the county auditor to make advance payments of taxes pursuant to Ohio Revised Code Section 321.34 and declaring an emergency. A resolution requesting the county auditor to make advance payments of taxes pursuant to Ohio Revised Code Section 321.34 and declaring an emergency. A resolution requesting the county auditor to make advance payments of taxes pursuant to Ohio Revised Code Section 321.34 and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Clark.
I move that this resolution be passed.
Seconded by Mr. Blair. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mrs. Stickley.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Yes.
Mr. Senker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Before we move on to administration reports, I forgot to mention at the beginning of this meeting that we have a guest tonight. Adam Helwig is here from Boy Scout Troop 598 from Evendale. Can you stand up for us, Adam? I'm sorry to put you on the spot. But he's here earning his communications badge, so we try to be polite to each other when we're communicating here. So we just want to welcome you and hope that you learned something. If you have any questions, I'm sure anybody here would be happy to talk with you after the meeting. Thank you for attending. We'll move on to administration reports. We'll have the auditor's report that was added. Mr. Stitt?
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to say welcome to the new council people that are here. This is, I'm sure, an exciting time for you. Everybody has their own dreams and projects that they want to undertake, and will tend to see me as the person who will tell you how we can't afford most of those things. My job as auditor is to keep the books and try to project our revenues, try to keep track of our expenses, and pay the bills. And sometimes that's not easy. Year-end report is completed. Actually, I just finished the auditor's report for 2015 this afternoon. I'll be emailing them to the Secretary of the Clerk of Council on Friday. They'll be available on my website, norwoodauditor.com, probably the Monday before the next meeting. And then at the next council meeting, we'll do a presentation of all that information. We ended the year in a negative balance, which is not good. We owe, on a cash basis, $171,379. We spent that much more than the money we brought in, plus any money we carried over from the previous year. Two major contributing factors created that situation. One was both November and December's revenue was down under our expected revenue. And as we got into November and saw the revenue was down, we hit December 1st, and there were some expenses that should be paid on the 1st that we held off because the money wasn't there. And we started going into December, and the big expense that we held off, to the displeasure of many of our employees, was the longevity pay, $88,015 out of the general fund. We held that back until we looked like our revenue would be able to cover that, and we paid that out about a week before Christmas to the employees. The revenue was still coming in through the month, and then at the end of the year, the last 2 weeks, it tanked again, and we saw our revenue drop, and our earnings tax was below our projections. Understanding that most of the revenue for the city is the earnings tax, the majority of it. We do have other streams of revenue, such as property tax, being the next largest, and our intergovernmental revenue, but the earnings tax took a dip in November and December. Now, we did well overall throughout the year, and we were about $465,000 above our initial projections for the year, but as we adjusted those projections, most of it was kind of front-loaded, and those last 2 months dropped off. So where we were aiming for a zero balance, we ended up negative. On top of that, besides the revenue being down, we were, as a city, faced with some monumental changes in our overtime. The year ended with general fund expenditures, meaning not water and streets departments and recreation, but overtime expenditures of $804,000. Now that's just the dollars that are going out in addition to the hours worked. That's just the additional money, the time and a half, or just the half time that's going out. You have to add to that 33% pension contribution for fire, 22% for the police, 14.5% for everybody else. You have to add Medicare, you have to add workers' comp. By the time you add these things, that $804,000 really gets to the point of about $1.2 million, the true cost of overtime in the city. Those two things combined cost us money at the end of the year and left us with a negative cash balance. The projections of our revenue through 2016 are based on 10 years performance on a month-to-month basis on other funds and projections of how much we expect to come in monthly for each one of the keys in the general fund, of which there's about 100. So when we look at how much we're going to be bringing in monthly, we're in a situation where we're not going to be able to pay the bills that we want to pay in 2016. Much less the money that we owe from 2015. Means the city is going to have to operate on a cash basis form of accounting or closed departments. Cash basis form of accounting means we are spending money and paying for things as the money comes in, not accruing money and including all of our debt or our outstanding POs. Which means you have to start having meetings that look at the money owed and decide what gets paid and what doesn't get paid. You usually start by healthcare. You've got to keep everyone's health insurance. That's first. Payroll, second. You got to pay the people who are working here. What's third, fourth, fifth? Bond payments. I'd argue that the bond payments have to come before payroll because you can't let the bonds go. This year is going to be tough because we're carrying a negative balance over and we are faced with a $1.5 million bond debt to be paid partially in March and partially in April. These bonds are debt that go back to 1996. They have been refinanced, added to, restructured, first in 2003, then in 2006, then again 2 years by this city council, in trying to make it affordable to avoid situations like we are in now. But this is debt from stuff that we couldn't afford in 96. We couldn't afford it in 2003. We couldn't afford it in 2006. We can continue to try to kick this can down the road, or we can be done with it now. We pay the $1.5 million this year. We pay the interest on the outstanding notes. And from now through 2022, our bond debt is about $300,000 a year. That's the lowest that it's ever been in this entire bond cycle. And then we're done with it in 2022. We can start using the money, the extra $1.5 million we'll have next year, to pay the things we owe from this year, to get caught up on the police and fire pension, to get caught up on the retirees' health care, to get caught up on all the vendors that we're going to be 60 or 90 days behind on. But it's going to be a very tough financial year that is going to take the involvement of not just the Finance Committee, but of the administration and all of council. The tough decisions have to be made. What gets paid, what doesn't get paid. One of the big outstanding things that we have is we owe $347,090 back payments to the C9 Trust. Mr. Whittington, a councilman, used to be the liaison to the C9 Trust and talked to the retirees' representatives and let them know what was going on in council, what was going on financially he is no longer on council. So I think we need somebody from this council to start communicating with the C9 Trust, and that's probably a discussion you should have, because they're going to start showing up and wanting to know where their money is. But I'm telling you, looking at the cash flow balance right now, I don't know how we're going to pay it. We're going to promise to pay something that we know we have no way of paying, at least this year. That being said, you know, at the end of the year, there were a number of people from the Recreation Department that did not get a paycheck. This was done because the Recreation Commission is managed as a fund. It is a separate fund. If you want to think of an account, think of, when you use the word fund, think of an account. Think of it as a separate checking account. Although it is something separate from the general fund. It has its own appropriations. It has its own revenue stream and its own expenses. And if its revenues run out, you cannot expend beyond the zero balance. It's not like the fire department when it runs over appropriations. We can let it go over a little bit. You can't let the balance of the fund go below zero. That fund dropped to below zero at the end of November. We went ahead and paid the first paycheck in December. We talked to the safety service director, who communicated to the head of recreation saying, you need to bring in X amount of dollars or we will not be able to issue a paycheck at the end of the year to these people. And they did not bring that money in. The plan was, first banking day of the year, January 1st would have been the pay date, but the first banking day of the year was January 4th. All of those people got paid. And I should say, that I have to correct that statement. Not all of the people got paid, because we're still getting phone calls. What I want to tell you is that everybody who turned in a timesheet to my office got paid. If there are people out there with recreation that didn't get paid, we never got your timesheet. We've gone back over it. Every timesheet got paid out on January 4th. The reason they weren't paid is because there was no money in the fund. Now, there's a department head out there that apparently, and I'll not name them because I hear this from parents calling me up and saying, hey, I apologize for the way we spoke to you before last meeting, making accusations you weren't paying everybody, because now we understand the situation. Now we understand there's no money in that fund to make the payments. But what we were being told is that the auditor's office was not paying those paychecks and was holding them back because of a personal vendetta the auditor has against that department head. Heard that from multiple individuals. Can't say it, didn't hear it myself. But I'll tell you what, if anybody hears that, it is a flat-out lie. That is reprehensible behavior from a department head if it happened. If anyone's telling you that, they are lying to your face. And that type of behavior should not be tolerated in a city. I'm happy to talk to anybody and explain to them how the bills are paid, to try to give them an idea of when they're going to be paid for things. We're having some tough financial times. Frankly, 2017 will get caught up. 2018, we'll have money to do things. But going around and saying that we're just holding checks in my office because we don't like you is unprofessional. One more comment about checks. I do want to say that 2016 is an unusual year. It has not 26 payrolls in it, it has 27 payrolls in it. So when we're talking about cash flow crunch for this year, understand that there's a whole extra payroll. General fund alone, let's take a look at what 2015. Okay, so to let you know, November's payroll out of 2015 in November, just out of the general fund, not water and streets and rec, was $874,907. Not including Medicare, not including pension contributions, not including workers' comp. So when we're talking about adding an extra payroll, you're talking $450,000 extra payment that we have to make out of the general fund by the end of the year. The auditor's report will be available to you within the next couple of days, and I'll be available for any questions.
Do you have more good news for us?
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions of Mr. Stiff? Mr. Bonson?
I just have a quick question, but I'm sure I'll have more in the future. But just the Recreation Commission funds that were used to pay the people and pay them in 2016, but for the work in 2015, did that money come from a 2016 fund, or was it included in that $171,000 that you quoted us earlier?
Mr. Stiff?
Yes, Madam President. The $171,000 was general fund money only. You know, the general fund is where the majority of payroll comes out of. Just to kind of give you a little information, I mentioned streets is another fund with payroll, recreation is another fund with payroll, water is another fund with payroll. Those are the only three outside the general fund. The general fund subsidizes some funds, including recreation fund, meaning that we set aside about $50,000 a year in addition to the revenue that they bring in. And when they dip negative throughout the year, we transfer the balance in. But at the end of the year, that transfer amount was gone and their revenue didn't meet their expenses at the end of the year. So when we made that payment to those employees in January, we're going to have to take that out of 2016's money. So as we approach the end of the year, understanding that that is going to happen again, unless they make cuts. They're going to run out of money probably in November, mid-November, and miss the last four payrolls. Yeah, because there's an extra one. There's 3 in December. 3 in January, tough month. 3 in June, tough month. And 3 in December, really tough month.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stiff. Any other questions or discussion? All right, thank you. We'll move on to other requests to address council. The first is Mary Barber. Would you like to come up to the podium and give us your name and address, and you'll have 5 minutes to address council.
My name is Mary Barber. I live at 4229 Allison Street. I'm a lifelong citizen of Norwood. This letter is addressed to all current and past administration officials, members of council, the fire department, the police department, all workers for the city of Norwood, the Norwood Public Schools, and the general public. It is with great sadness I inform you all of the passing of Miss Margaret Waymeyer last Wednesday, December 6th, at the age of 91. Miss Waymeyer was well known as a lifelong resident of Norwood, still living in the house built by her grandfather. She was one of the city's strongest and most active advocates. She was never one to sit back silently or allow others to speak for her. Margaret was a true pioneer throughout her life. In her professional career, she was the first woman to break through the glass ceiling at Gradison & Company to become the first female vice president. After she retired, she became quite active in civic affairs and was a devoted Reds and Bengals fan. Her interest in the city of Norwood and the schools took her down some very interesting paths, and she was a very powerful trailblazer. She attended council meetings on a regular basis, checked on school board activities, and would show up at numerous committee meetings. If there was any situation that she was displeased with or she thought needed attention, she would be one of the first and sometimes the only person that had the courage to stand up and speak out. Ms. Waymeyer helped to establish the West Norwood Neighborhood Association and was instrumental in getting the original West Norwood Police substation up and running. Unfortunately, the city allowed this much-needed substation to close, and police presence in this troubled area again diminished. Now all we have is a police museum at the community center that provides no real police service, and it seems such a loss for our community and a great disappointment for Margaret. Then there was the group, the Citizens for a Better Norwood. This organization was devoted to citywide issues involving politics, school board decisions, zoning issues, Xavier, retail, and business developments. 2 words that you learned to never mention to Margaret were eminent domain. Margaret was very committed to the veterans and would frequently attend any ceremonies at Victory Park or elsewhere. It didn't matter to her if the event was held early or at midnight. Her American flag was always out on display for appropriate holidays and events. She also was not adverse to marching in the Norwood Day Parade, throwing candy to the kids, and generally having a good time, rain or shine. Miss Waymeyer loved life and tried to live hers to the fullest. She was a force to be reckoned with, but more than anything else, she was a friend. She never met a stranger and was always taking care of others. For me, she was my neighbor for 43 years. She was my mentor, teacher, mother figure, and friend. Both my husband and I will miss our mom so very much, but we will never forget her. She is emblazoned in our hearts and in our thoughts. And I thank you very much for having a moment of silence for her earlier. In my opinion, I feel the woman deserved a parade. Thank you.
Now, Pastor St. James, you have to follow that. And you'll have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. I am Pastor Sonny James of Keep It Real Worldwide Ministries. I'm very honored to stand before council and residents of Norwood. I want to, first of all, say to Mary, that was very, very kind of her to recognize a committed advocate in our community. And so to her family and friends, I want to assure them that there are advocates still on the prowl to address issues at hand, and I'm proud to be one of them. I came today because I wanted to first congratulate and welcome all of you folks that have joined our council and encourage you to work together, not only amongst yourselves, but with the residents that are here trying to also pave the way. Recently, I was very excited to be in a meeting with Mr. Blair, who I commend on stepping up and trying to help us address issues in our community. At the same time, we have individuals in our top leadership in our community that we have a habit sometimes, folks, of saying we need the community support, we need community residents to step up, but yet when we do, for instance, I recently put together On the Rough Side program, bringing in at-risk youth in our community that have had some issues, brought in some non-traditional mentors to speak candidly into them. And these young folks were able to confess. They were seen oftentimes crying. But yet prior to this meeting, although we had a community meeting with our top officials there, that meeting the attempt was made to prevent that meeting from happening. We were already set to meet at a location, and our top official then tried to interfere. My thing to us all is, it is time to work together. I've presented a 13-point plan. I have over 25 years experience working with at-risk youth and individuals that have created issues for our communities from the West Coast to the East Cost. My personal email is pastorsonnyjames@gmail.com. If anyone on council, the mayor, would like to actually see proven results, I have a ton of them. Over a year ago, I began canvassing our community. When there were issues at hand, I rose to the forefront. I went out talking to businesses and residents, talking about bringing surveillance cameras to our community. And we have individuals and businesses ready to support that. I've talked with Mr. Stiff on occasion to begin that process. When we had violence and problems in our communities, you all have heard, some of you have heard about our March for Peace rallies. With us out there with the bullhorns, right on the streets where we've had shootings and problems. If you go on those same areas like Sherman and Carter Avenue, it's almost like a ghost town now. In fact, often the word has gotten back that, hey, is that Reverend guy still coming back? And the answer, of course, is yes. We will be out there addressing the issues. Sometimes the police can't even get resolved. A lot of times these folks have been out on the street corners with the police sitting right there. But when you have community presence, I just want to encourage you, instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, guys, let's work together. And to our mayor, I'm not against you, sir. To our police, I'm not against our police. My 14-year-old son wants to be a police staff here in Norwood one day. In fact, he wants to possibly be the chief one day. So I support our police. I support our mayor. At the same time, Mayor, with the things that I'm doing, they're not going away. I can't be bullied, I can't be ran off, and I'm not afraid. Most of you know that, and if you don't, I'm here to tell you. I want our community to be safe. I want to help us with some of our funding, with our rec department, and this will be my last issue that I'll address. I'm going to get a lot of the residents together, and we're going to do what's called a relay for rec. Because I personally was totally disappointed to hear that we pay certain departments tons of money in overtime that necessarily didn't bring about any change. Yet we were a few $1,000s away from paying individuals. So again, I am going to step up and bring dollars to the table so that that does not happen again. But I will say to you in closing, it's time to work together. If you haven't seen my 13-point plan, by all means, please email me. To date, I've heard from Andrew Clark, who's always a great supporter. I did hear back from Mr. Blair saying that it sounded like our On the Rough Side was a success, and it was. I just want us to get along, guys. If you don't like somebody in this community, it's okay. But guess what? We all have to live together so that we can make this community a better place. And the next time we do an event, please, city leadership, if you don't want to be a part of it, call me personally and let's talk about it. Let's iron out whatever problems we have, because I do love my town and I will promise to work with anybody. I guarantee it. God bless you, and I'm so excited to work with all of the new council members as well. Please call me.
Thank you, Pastor James.
Thank you.
There were no other requests to address council, so we'll move on to unfinished business. Is there any unfinished business? Hearing none, we'll move on to new business.
Madam
Mr.
President.
Bonsall.
Thank you very much. 28 states and countless municipalities across these United States have passed an ordinance that has established a minimum distance an automobile must give a bicyclist when passing them, including the city of Cincinnati. I think it's time Norwood consider such an ordinance, and I'd like to have the Law and Ordinance Committee take this up.
Okay. So you're requesting that the Law and Ordinance Committee look at an ordinance establishing minimum distances between vehicles and bicycles.
Yes.
And Mrs. Stickley, you are chair of that committee, so the clerk will usually write a letter and let you know that that's been placed in your committee.
Great, thank you.
And you can take that up. And the other members are Mr. Clark and Mr. Sanker. Thank you, Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you.
Is there any other new business? No? Okay. We will move on to communications. The first is a letter from the law director regarding the assistant law director.
Dear council members, I am writing to inform you under Section 3 of Ordinance 33-2009 that the qualifications, expertise, and educational background of Timothy A. Gary Jr. dictate that his rate of pay as assistant law director be higher than the lowest rate contained in the ordinance. I am seeking council approval for a salary within the range for assistant law director of $65,000 retroactive to January 1, 2016. I'm also requesting permission to address council when this matter is discussed. Sincerely, Keith D. Moore, Norwood Law Director.
Mr. Mumford.
Yes, I move the letter be received and filed and placed in the Finance Committee, and I think we should allow Mr. Moore to comment on this.
Is there a second to that motion? Seconded by Mr. Bonsall. The motion on the floor is to receive and file the letter, to place the matter into the Finance Committee, and to allow Mr. Moore to address council on this matter. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
No.
Mrs. Stickley.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
No.
Mrs. Hanrahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mumford.
Yes.
By a vote of 5-2, the motion passes. Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Madam President. So I understand this is going to the Finance Committee. I'll save my comments for that. I just wanted to make sure I had a chance to talk whenever somebody did talk about this.
Alrighty. So again, Finance Committee, Mr. Sanker, you took that on again. I don't know if that was voluntarily or not, but Mr. Sanker, Mr. Clark, Mr. Mumper, and Mrs. Stickley will be notified of that being placed into the committee. Next is a letter from the mayor regarding mayor's court fines.
Dear Madam President and members of council, enclosed, please find the report for Norwood Mayor's Court for the month of December 2015. Should you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. Sincerely, Thomas F. Williams, Mayor, City of Norwood.
Mr. Clark,
Move that the letter be received and filed.
seconded by Mr. Blair. Is there any discussion? Mr. Mumper?
Yes, this report's getting longer and longer, and it doesn't look like anybody learned how to use the two-sided copier function on the copier. We don't really need all this information. We could just do with the totals, and I think it's a waste of paper. And I've already told the clerk of courts that several times, and it is a waste of paper for all of us to have a copy of this.
Mr. Mayor, is this required? It may be required by law, I don't know. Mr. Mayor, do you know?
It's one of our strong efforts to serve, John. But I'll talk if it's legal, we'll do it. If nobody wants it, that's fine. It's just, a lot of times when you don't provide it, somebody wants it and thinks you're trying to hide something,
You know,
so.
it could probably be set out digitally. It'd be a lot easier.
Well, we can talk, John. I send up smoke signals, I'll do something to get it out.
We've
But
done that.
if, a lot of times if we don't, then somebody says we're trying to hide something. So if it's legal to eliminate it, we'll eliminate it. If not, then we'll keep providing it.
And I'll look into it. The motion on the floor is to receive and file the letter. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mrs. Stickley.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next is the letter from the mayor regarding appointment to the Norwood Board of Zoning Appeals.
Dear Mr. Dumont, this letter will confirm your appointment to the Norwood Board of Zoning Appeals effective January 1, 2016. Your term will expire on December 31, 2020. Thank you for accepting this appointment, and I look forward to working with you in the future. Sincerely, Thomas F. Williams, Mayor, City of Norwood.
Mr. Clark,
Move that the letter be received and filed.
is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Blair. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mrs. Stickley.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next is a letter from the mayor regarding appointment to the Board of Health.
Dear Ms. Newton, this letter will confirm your appointment to the Norwood Board of Health effective January 1, 2016, pending approval by Norwood City Council. By copy of this letter, I am requesting that they approve your appointment. Your term will expire on December 31, 2020. Thank you for accepting this position, and I look forward to working with you in the future. Sincerely, Thomas F. Williams, Mayor, City of Norwood.
Mr. Sanker,
Madam President, I'd recommend that the letter be received and filed and the appointment be approved.
seconded by Mr. Mumper. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mrs. Stickley.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next is a letter from the mayor regarding appointment to the Board of Health.
Dear Mr. Lane, this letter will confirm your appointment to the Norwood Board of Health effective January 1, 2016, pending approval by Norwood City Council. By copy of this letter, I am requesting that council approve your appointment. Your term will expire on January 31, 2020. Thank you for your dedication to the city, and I look forward to working with you. Sincerely, Thomas F. Williams, Mayor, City of Norwood.
Mr. Sanker,
Madam President, I would recommend that this letter be received and filed and the appointment be approved as well.
seconded by Mr. Mumper. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mrs. Stickley.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next is a letter from the mayor regarding appointment to the Norwood Civil Service Commission.
Dear Kim, this letter will confirm your appointment to the Norwood Civil Service Commission effective January 1, 2016, Your term will expire on December 31, 2021. Thank you for accepting this position, and I look forward to working with you in the future. Sincerely, Thomas F. Williams, Mayor, City of Norwood.
Mr. Sanker.
Madam President, I'd recommend that the letter be received and filed and the appointment be approved.
I think we need to approve it, just need to receive and file it. Seconded by Mrs. Stickley. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mrs. Stickley.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next is a letter from the mayor regarding appointment to the plumbing board.
Dear Mr. Ferguson, your current term as a member of the Norwood Plumbing Board will expire December 31, 2015. It is my understanding that you are willing to accept another appointment. Therefore, this letter will confirm your reappointment to the Norwood Plumbing Board beginning January 1, 2016 and expiring December 31, 2018. Thank you for your dedication to the city, and I look forward to working with you. Sincerely, Thomas F. Williams, Mayor, City of Norwood.
Mr. Mumper.
I move the letter be received and filed.
Seconded by Mr. Sanker. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mrs. Stickley.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next is a letter from the mayor regarding appointment to the tree board.
Dear John, this letter will confirm your appointment to the Norwood Tree Board effective January 1, 2016. Your appointment will be pending approval by Norwood City Council. By copy of this letter, I am requesting that they approve your appointment. Your term will expire on December 31, 2018. Thank you for accepting this position, and I look forward to working with you in the future. Sincerely, Thomas F. Williams, Mayor, City of Norwood.
Mr. Mumper.
Move the letter be received and filed, and we approve the appointment of Mr. Hannerhan.
Seconded by Mr. Sanker. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mrs. Stickley.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next is a letter from the mayor regarding appointment to the tree board.
Dear Donna, this letter will confirm your appointment to the Norwood Tree Board effective January 1, 2016. Your appointment will be pending approval by Norwood City Council. By copy of this letter, I am requesting that they approve your appointment. Your term will expire on December 31, 2020. Thank you for accepting this position, and I look forward to working with you in the future. Sincerely, Thomas F. Williams, Mayor, City of Norwood.
Mr. Mumper.
I move we receive and file the letter, and we approve the appointment of Mrs. Lake.
Seconded by Mrs. Hannerhan. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mrs. Stickley.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next is the first of our additions, a letter from the Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Regional Council of Governments.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, the term of your current representative on the Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Regional Council of Governments Board of Directors for 2015 will expire upon convening the Board of Directors of the Council on January 14, 2016. In order for the new Board of Directors to duly convene at the Board of Directors meeting, it is requested that your agency submit the name of its appointment to the OKI Board of Directors. The OKI Articles of Agreement require that persons representing counties, city, townships, or planning agencies must be selected by the governing body of that organization. When your agency has taken official action to designate its representative, please return the enclosed form to the Secretary. Your reply is needed as quickly as possible and no later than January 8, 2016. Representation on the OKI Board of Directors is not a commitment to fund OKI. Non-federal monies to operate OKI are obtained mainly from participating counties through funding agreements. The purpose of local representation on OKI is to assure that work on behalf of the region is responsive to local needs. Your cooperation is greatly appreciated. Sincerely, Mark Polisinski, CEO/Executive Director.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, Madam President, I'd recommend that the letter be received and filed, and I'd recommend that Mr. Bonzo, if he was interested in serving as our elected official to OKI, be appointed to that position. if the rest of council approves, unless someone else had an interest.
Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Mumper. Mr. Bonso, are you willing to accept the position? It does need to be an elected official, or you can designate someone else if you're unable to attend.
Yes, I would like to serve there.
Great, so the motion on the floor is to receive and file the letter and to appoint Mr. Bonso as the City of Norwood's representative to OKI. Is there any other discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
You can vote.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mrs. Stickley.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Handerhand.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Trust me, you will have no fiduciary gain from that appointment, so you're good.
It's not an honor.
We'll move on to communication number 11 from Chuck Barlow regarding earnings tax.
To Norwood City Council, attached is the monthly report for December 2015 indicating collections in the amount of $990,737.75. This reflects an increase of 5.1% from 2014. Yearly totals are also shown. Should you have any questions, please contact the Earnings Tax Department, Chuck Barlow, Earnings Tax Department.
Mr. Mumper,
Move a letter be received and filed.
seconded by Mr. Clark. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mrs. Stickley.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Handerhand.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Finally, is a letter from Chris Brown regarding the Law Director's annual report for 2015.
Dear Madam President and members of council, pursuant to Ohio Revised Code, Section 733.62, I am pleased to submit the following report of the activities of the Law Director's Office for the year ending December 31, 2015. Section 1, Non-Litigation. The Law Department provides legal advice to the municipal officers of the city, boards, and commissions. Much of that advice was provided at the request of elected officials, members of our city government, boards, and commissions. In 2015, the Law Department assisted the police and fire departments, the Division of Building and Property Maintenance, and the Health Department to address matters involving nuisance properties and zoning. We prepared and reviewed numerous contracts involving the city, including employment contracts with unions representing city workers. In addition, we helped draft and review contracts with private parties, including contracts for the construction and leasing of Brookwood Exchange. The Law Department drafted numerous ordinances and resolutions at the request of the mayor, city officials, or departments in 2015. Among these were an ordinance rezoning several large portions of the city to help promote economic growth and to maintain a high quality of buildings and uses in those locations. Section 2, Mayor's Court Fines and Costs. The Law Department prosecutes misdemeanor offenses and traffic violations in Mayor's Court, which is held twice weekly at City Hall. A complete record of fines and court costs collected by the Clerk of Courts is attached as Exhibit A. 2015 collections decreased from 2014. This decrease may be attributable to the reduction in available patrol officers. With the hiring of new officers, this number should increase in 2016, especially so long as Norwood maintains its agreement with the Butler County Jail. This agreement relieves Norwood of the overcrowding problem at the Hamilton County Justice Center. Word is out that jail sentences issued in Norwood's mayor's courts are no longer delayed or summarily reduced by the Hamilton County Sheriff, but are enforced in full. In response, compliance with court orders, including payment of fines and court costs, has increased dramatically. We also prosecute criminal and traffic cases in Hamilton County Municipal Court, including objections to magistrates' decisions and cases transferred from Mayor's Court. Section 3, Litigation. The Law Department is involved in litigation brought against the city in both state and federal court. We represent the city directly or assist outside counsel in seeking resolutions to these matters. Several lawsuits were settled by the parties and/or were dismissed in 2015. The Law Department continued to handle the nuisance action brought against the owners of the Quality Inn Hotel. At the end of 2015, the hotel was transferred to new owners. Our hope is that 2016 will see the property turned around and brought back to some productive and positive use. The Law Department also works with the Mayor and Safety Service Director to address and resolve grievances filed against the city. We work with Norwood Police, Hamilton County Sheriff's deputies, and other officials to identify sex offenders living within 1,000 feet of a school, park, daycare, or playground in violation of state or local law. The law department notifies such offenders and informs them that they must either move or face legal action. It has been an honor and a privilege to serve Norwood and its citizens as the city's attorney, both as the assistant law director and the law director. I'd like to recognize the outstanding staff of the law department, Sharon Harris and the former assistant law director, Michael Cook, for all they did for Norwood. Their contributions to our community were too numerous to count. It is my firm belief that Norwood is heading in the right direction and that its future remains bright. Sincerely, Christopher S. Brown, Law Director.
Mr. Mumford.
I move the letter be received and filed.
Seconded by Mr. Clark. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mrs. Stickley.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
You took Jeff down there?
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. We have no absent members. Mr. Clark.
Move that we adjourn.
Seconded by Mr. Mumford. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mrs. Stickley.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. This meeting is hereby adjourned.